What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 10. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of people's squads and give you my opinion on whether they are good moves or not. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. Let's start with Dominic Solanke. It's Aston Villa at home in Game Week 10 and Ipswich at home in Game Week 11. And yet some FPL managers have started to sell him to the point where he's closing in on nearly 100,000 transfers out this week. And I kind of get it, because the last 3 game weeks have not been great, but also there's a ton of cheap forwards just doing as well, if not better. So not only can you get more points, you can also free up money like Chris Wood, Strand Larsen, Cunha, Raul Jimenez, Visser, just to name a few. So I kind of get why people are moving off Solanke. Now, I spoke about him last week and I said that I thought he was someone to keep hold of for most people. And I don't want to flip-flop my opinion too much. I don't all of a sudden think he's terrible, but maybe it's somewhere in between. Because on a team level, we go back to Spurs' attacking numbers. They're doing really well this season. For non-penalty XG, they're still top out of all teams, 1.97 per game. They're a decent attacking team. Solanke's their number 9. He's 7.7 million. In isolation, it feels like quite a nice price, apart from when you compare it to all the cheaper forwards that are doing a little bit better at the moment. But I'm not massively concerned about Spurs in general, and I think at home, it'll be a much different performance to what it was against Crystal Palace. And on an individual level, Solanke's running at 0.51 non-penalty XG for the season, which is pretty good, right? Per 90 minutes. He's still a good option, I would say, for 7.7 with the 2 fixtures he's got right in front of him. But I fully understand that people are concerned based on what happened over the last 3 game weeks. You look at the Palace game, 0.02 XG. Absolutely terrible. Against West Ham, a game where Spurs scored 4 goals, 0.08. He's having hardly any shots at the moment as well. And against Brighton, where Spurs scored twice, it was 0 XG. So it's really not that promising if these performances continue. I'm not even necessarily saying that Solanke has been bad for Spurs overall. I think he's bringing other players into play, etc. But for FPL, we need those points, right? Now, the thing that encourages me a little bit is if you go back just a bit more, against Man United in Game Week 6, it was XG 1.33, and against Brentford in Game Week 5, it was 1.61. If Son is ruled out for this week, and we'll talk about him in a minute, Solanke is probably next in line for penalties. Not a guarantee, but possibly. And so, basically, he's not done great. There's players doing better that are cheaper. I get the urge to sell him, but I think with the next 2 fixtures, you've probably got to accept you're keeping hold of him. It just doesn't feel right to sell a player not long before they play Ipswich at home. And I know I said the same thing about Calvert-Lewin, and he didn't do very well, but he did get a ton of chances in that game. Like, his XG was over 1. Solanke could do something similar. So I think, look, there's always going to be that person watching that's got the perfect team where it makes sense to sell Solanke. That might be you. But for most people, you've probably got more pressing issues, and Solanke can just wait until Game Week 12. If you're sat there with no flags on any players, you haven't got Son, you haven't got Gabriel, you've already got Salah and Palmer or Haaland and Palmer in place, and you want to sell Solanke to one of those cheaper forwards to be able to afford like a Saka or someone like that, absolutely fair enough. If you've got the free transfers, go ahead. But for most people, you just keep him for Ipswich and reassess afterwards. And I actually quite like the idea of holding on to him a couple more weeks, because in Game Week 12, there's a bit of a fixture swing. We know that Chelsea fixtures get good, so everyone's looking at Cole Palmer if you don't already own him. Arsenal fixtures get good as well, so we might want cheap forwards to fund that. And in Game Week 12, that's also when Brighton's fixtures get good. So potentially, I've just named 5 cheap forwards. I haven't even mentioned Danny Welbeck. He could be another option from 12 that you could drop down to. But also, there's fixture swings for a few more expensive forwards. So having Solanke at that 7.7 million price point, or 7.6 depending on when you bought him, it might make it a little bit easier to go to the likes of Ollie Watkins, who is obviously... sorry, I've gone to West Ham there. Who's obviously more expensive, but having Solanke is a bit easier to get up to him. And from Game Week 12, Aston Villa's fixtures are Palace at home, Chelsea away, which is not so good, but then it's Brentford at home, Southampton at home. Now, that little run of 4 fixtures is pretty decent. After that, I'm not so sure you need Watkins. Forest away, Man City at home, Newcastle away. But he's so consistent. He always starts, I should say. And the minutes are generally pretty good as well. There has still been some early substitutions, and I guess with Duran around, that's always a possibility. But Watkins is a solid option. Who knows? Maybe he's going to be on penalties. We still don't know who's going to take penalties for Aston Villa. But also, I've mentioned Cole Palmer. Nicholas Jackson's also an option too. Like, he is their first choice number 9, starts every single game, and we know how good Chelsea's fixtures are from 12 onwards. So right now, don't get me wrong, it feels like the meta for FPL is a ton of cheap forwards, and maybe Haaland as well. So 2 cheap forwards and Haaland, or just 3 cheap forwards, and then at least 2 premium midfielders like Palmer, Salah, and maybe Saka as well if you don't have Haaland. That can change quite quickly, right? Not many people were talking about that a few weeks ago. By game week 12, it might have flipped again. So I think if you can, I would just hold Solanke for a couple more and then just reassess in 12. It might be that you still want to go down to that cheap forward to then move to a premium midfielder, but it might be that you just want to buy Nicholas Jackson and you've got like 0.5 million in the bank and you can do that in one move. And I think for the highly engaged FPL managers that are going to be playing for the season, I doubt many people have actually got Jackson. I suspect his ownership overall is quite high. Yeah, 17.5%. But I bet a lot of people watching this don't own him. And I think he's going to become a bit of a differential. He's already got 6 goals, 3 assists this season. It's kind of gone under the radar a little bit. His underlying numbers continue to be really well. His minutes continue to be really good. He's just a potential option. If you're clear that you don't want to go there and you've got the transfers, maybe sell Solanke now. But I don't know. Like, Ipswich, I just can't sell him before that. And he'll probably blank, but I think he's still someone worth holding on to. I think Spurs will be a different animal at home. Let's stick to Spurs and talk about Son next. Now, I'm not going to go into the fixtures and how good the Spurs attack is and stuff like that. I've just spoken about that with Solanke. But at the moment, Son is yellow flagged in FPL, and we're not sure whether he's going to be available for game week 10. So I want to talk about potentially what to do with him. Now, the good news is that Spurs have a Carabao Cup fixture midweek against Man City. So we're going to hear from Ange Postecoglou twice before game week 10. Once before the Carabao Cup game and then once before the Aston Villa game. And he's very open about injuries. So if Son is anywhere near ready to be back in that 11, I think Ange will give us a good indication. He's not going to tell us the lineup, of course, but before game week 8, he said that Son was good to go. So if he says something like that again, I would expect him to be in the 11. And it's quite likely that he'll be back for game week 10 based on something that Paul O'Keefe said on Twitter, who often gets good Spurs information. Now, someone asked him about Son ahead of the Palace game, and he said he's rested. Someone replied, injured, you mean? And he said, precautionary, he could have played. Now, I think that's overall a good sign, although saying that you're kind of resting him precautionary is another way of saying he's not quite fit enough to start. So it is a little bit of a concern for me because essentially he had like 3 or 4 weeks off, played 69 minutes against West Ham, and then a week later couldn't play against Crystal Palace. So I think that's got to be a bit of a concern for the next 2 games. Like, Ange might say that he's going to start, but how many minutes is he going to get against Aston Villa? Like, it might be another 60 to 70, and if he pulls through that okay, then maybe you get 60 to 70 against Ipswich as well. Like, you don't need to push on for 90 minutes against Ipswich. So I think he's probably going to be back for game week 10, but I think we should be a little bit concerned about his fitness levels. But because the 2 fixtures are so good, Villa and Ipswich at home, I'm kind of leaning right now towards keeping him. I think it's a tricky situation for a lot of people because ultimately Son will be taking up a spot probably for Salah or Saka or Palmer, and all 3 of them look really good right now. But I think because of the fixtures, you can maybe get away with holding Son if you don't really want to sell him. Now, Cole Palmer is brilliant. I am not trying to put anyone off buying him. I may well buy him this week myself. But Man United away and Arsenal at home is not as good as Newcastle at home that they just had. So, potentially, Son, if he's going to start the next 2 up against Palmer, could maybe match him, or potentially, if we get really lucky, outscore him. It's just worth saying that Palmer continues to go up in price, and that is a little bit of a concern. With Saka, I think, again, he's a good option if you want to bring him in. But Newcastle away, Chelsea away doesn't scream essential. So I think for that reason, if you own Son, you should probably give him every chance to start that Villa game. But for me, if there's any doubt, I think I'm just going to sell him. Like, that Ipswich home game looks really good for captaincy, but only if he's going to get decent minutes. And if he's not, captaining Salah or Haaland, which most people will own, in game week 11, where Salah's got, I think it's, Salah's at Aston Villa at home and Haaland's Brighton away, that's more than fine. So Son captaincy on paper looks great, but only if he's going to get decent minutes. So we need to hear what Ange says, and we'll cover that again in later videos this week. I'm leaning towards keeping Son if he's going to start, but I think any doubts, and I probably would look just to get rid and be done with it. I think long term, 13 onwards after that City away game, Son's actually probably a little bit underrated. But because we've got so many other good premium options, he's not a massive concern if you don't have him. So I might as well talk about Pedro Porro before I move on to players from other teams. I think like with Son and Solanke, because of the next two fixtures, if you've already got him, he's probably someone in most cases that's quite easy to hold on to. If you want to sell him down to a cheaper defender to fund another move, then fair enough. There is a lack of clean sheets with Spurs, a lack of attacking returns for him as well. But Villa at home and Ipswich at home is not that bad. It's certainly not likely to be one of the more pressing issues in your team. Game week 12, City away, tough. You could maybe look at getting rid of him then. But even after that, Fulham at home in 13 is not that bad. Should you buy Porro right now? Possibly not. For a little bit more money, you can get Van Dijk from Liverpool. Lots of people like Vardio at the moment. And generally, I think people are trying to take money of that out of their defence. So maybe Porro's not someone to look to bring in. But for anyone that owns him, I think he's a pretty easy hold. In terms of the defensive returns for Spurs, I think maybe they've been a little bit unlucky not to get more clean sheets. I think it's only 2 so far. If we look at them on a team basis, they are, where's defensive here? For for expected goals conceded, they sit in the top 5, 1.05, just a little bit worse than Villa and a little bit worse than Man City. So their defensive numbers are up on last year, but the clean sheets just aren't quite there. And I guess with the way that Ange Postecoglou plays, you're never likely going to get him you're never going to get him to kind of sit in and just protect a lead or anything like that. So maybe they are always susceptible to conceding, but the defensive numbers don't really suggest that. So maybe they've been a tad unlucky. And in terms of Porro himself, I think his attacking numbers probably are down on last year. So if I have a look at him for this year, let me just bring them up here. Yeah, 0.07 expected goals per 90, 0.14 expected assists. If I go back to last season, it was slightly higher goal threat and slightly higher assist threat. And if you go back to the season before that, much higher goal threat and assist threat was a little bit higher as well. So, I don't know, it's one of those weird situations where Porro's individual numbers are down a little bit, but Spurs' defensive numbers are up overall. I still think Porro's a pretty good option for the next two, and if I had him, unless I really needed the money for another move, I just reassess in 12. And I think that's probably got to be the general opinion for any Spurs players right now. Even James Maddison, I would probably hold on to. So if you're looking for a cheap defender this week, you're probably going to go for Ait Nouri from Wolves. He went up in price last night from 4.5 to 4.6 million, but that's still great value considering the fixtures they've got ahead of them and how attacking he can be. Even despite the 4 yellow card situation, I think most people will go for him. But if you don't want to go for him or you already own him and you're looking for an alternative, Aina from Nottingham Forest is a name that I've seen pop up a little bit this week. And I get it. They've got 3 home fixtures in the next 4. So West Ham in 10, Newcastle in 11 and Ipswich in 13. And defensively, they're pretty solid. Like when I see one of my attackers playing Nottingham Forest, I don't panic, right? It's not a terrible fixture. But I also don't see it as one to get a massive amount of returns in like I would with an Ipswich at home. And if we look at what they've done so far, they've only conceded more than 1 goal once. And that was against Brighton in game week 5 where they conceded twice. Every other game, it's 1 goal and that's it. And defensively, they are just a pretty solid team. I think Aina is absolutely nailed on as a fullback as well. I think at some point, like if Nico Williams came in and got a start, it would probably just mean that Aina would move to left back and Moreno would drop out. But right now, the back 4 is very consistent. Aina, Moreno, Mikalenkovic and Murillo as well. But I think Aina's probably the one to go for, right? 4.5 million, good price. Should we be targeting the Nottingham Forest defence, though? I'm not so sure. I mean, at 4.5 million, given that you can bench him in tougher fixtures, it's never going to be the end of the world bringing him in. And like I said, defensively, they're decent. But once those 3 home games are out of the way, you don't really see a huge amount more clean sheets on the horizon. And even like game week 11 against Newcastle, I don't think that's that easy. Again, I don't expect Forest to concede 3 or 4 goals, but I think if Isak remains fit, even though I don't think Newcastle have played that well this season so far, you're always going to have a goal in you when you've got someone like Isak playing as your number 9. So I'm not even sure I'm fully convinced about the Newcastle clean sheet. And then you're down to just West Ham and Ipswich, because outside of that, you've got Arsenal away in 12, City away in 14, Man United away in 15, who'll have a new manager by that point. Villa at home in 16 is going to be difficult. You're up against Ollie Watkins. Brentford away, not great. Not bad, but it's still an away game. You've got Brian in Burmo there. Spurs at home in 18. And again, we're coming off a week where Spurs have not done great against Crystal Palace, but they're a team that you would usually expect to score. Even then in 19 and 20, Everton and Wolves not that bad, but they're both away. Then you run into Liverpool at home. I just don't see many clean sheets for Nottingham Forest. And so I think in the short term, if you had to play Aina against West Ham, Newcastle, Ipswich, not a problem. But outside of that, I don't think it's great. So I think he could be a brilliant option when the fixtures get better, but I don't think that's the case for a very long time. And I wouldn't put people off buying him because he's so cheap, but I think there's just better defenders to go for. I would probably, unless your defence is in really dire need of a absolutely nailed on defender to play every single week, I'd probably risk 8 Nuri from Wolves, or you could even go to someone like Chelsea, like Colwill, at 4.6 million. Now, the problem is the next 2 fixtures are not great. United away and Arsenal at home. But after that, they're a little bit better. And I would see Chelsea as good a defence as Forest, if not slightly better. I mean, they've still got some tough fixtures like Villa at home in 13, Spurs away in 15. But a lot of their games are at home. And the away games are like Ipswich away in 19, Leicester away in 12, Southampton away in 14. It just looks much better. So unless you desperately need someone for 10 and 11, I think I would ignore Aina. I actually rate Nottingham Forest very highly as a team this year. I think they're looking really good. I just don't think now's the right time to buy him. Let's talk about Phil Foden next. Finally got another start in the Premier League against Southampton at home in game week 9. And what did he do that was peak FPL? Well, of course, he blanked, because that's just what happens sometimes in football and FPL. And I think anyone that took him on as a short-term punt, maybe before the Wolves game in game week 8 or Southampton in game week 9, can consider themselves a little bit unlucky. I think the majority of people thought that he would start both of those games, and he played well enough against Southampton to deserve at least one attack and return. So it sucks, but these things can happen, right? Moving forward, my thoughts on Foden. No one should be buying him, in my opinion. He might be about to go on a run of games, but they're not the best fixtures on paper. Like, no fixture is terrible for Man City, but Bournemouth away, Brighton away, Spurs at home, Liverpool away doesn't scream massive amounts of points. And I think with Gundogan there and maybe De Bruyne back at some point, Foden's minutes are still not fully secure. For anyone that owns him already, personally, I don't think Foden warrants a place in our squads right now. But that also doesn't mean that I think you have to go out of your way to sell him straight away. Because if De Bruyne is not back, depending on who lines up in the Carabao Cup midweek, it's possible Foden will start again. And Bournemouth away is not terrible, neither is Brighton away. So I don't think you need to necessarily move him on straight away. But I would imagine for most people, Foden was just a short-term stopgap before you go to a Son or a Saka or a Palmer, whoever it might be. Now, it's not like Foden and Palmer are similar prices. There's a 1.7 million price difference. But compared to a Saka, for example, it's only 0.7. I think Saka's 10 million. Let me just double check. Can't remember if he dropped in price back from 10.1. Yeah, he's 10 million. So for 0.7 million more, you've got an absolutely nailed-on attacker for Arsenal who's also on penalties. The minutes are great when he's fit and available. That 0.7 million is just worth paying. That's my problem with Foden. I just don't think he represents good value at that price point. The minutes are not fully secure. Even with the injuries they've got, I still think you're checking the lineup every time it comes out. And there's no penalties either, and the fixtures aren't amazing. So I think when you've got a spare transfer, you move to maybe Son if you want to take a punt on him and he's fit, but mostly Palmer, Salah, Saka, and then just be done with it. But like I say, you can have two thoughts at once. I don't think Foden, if I was wildcarding this week, Foden wouldn't even be a consideration. But that doesn't mean that you have to sell him. So if you want to keep him for Bournemouth, I think that's a more than fair decision. But eventually he's got to be upgraded to someone better, in my opinion. I've mentioned him a few times already, so let's talk about Bukayo Saka next. Over 100,000 transfers in so far this week, and he really was back with a bang against Liverpool, especially in that first half. I thought he played really well, and he got a 9-pointer, so 1 goal, 2 bonus, and that's his 3rd highest game week score of the season, and he's just been super consistent. He's played 8 matches, he missed the Bournemouth game in game week 8 through injury, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 attack and returns in 8 games. The only one he blanked in was the one where Arsenal scored 4 goals against Leicester at home, because of course he blanked in that game. Very similar to Foden blanking against Southampton. But overall, just unreal consistency. And I know I said earlier that Newcastle away and Chelsea away doesn't scream essential, and I stand by that. I don't think there's a rush to get Saka in. You could wait until 12 onwards. But also, if you've got the transfers and you just want to do it and leave him in while he's fit and available, I think that's fine. He's one of those players that you just don't have to worry about. And anyone that kept him and didn't make the Son move is absolutely laughing right now, because the fixtures they've got ahead of them, especially from 12 onwards, are just great. There's no real games here from like 12 to maybe the Man City game in 24 that you'd be worried about playing Saka. He's just back from injury, of course, but he got through 84 minutes, didn't really look uncomfortable at any point during that game. And obviously we'll hear from Arteta before the weekend, not that it'll matter. I think he'll be fine. So if you want to bring him in, absolutely great. And also, I think I've mentioned this week potentially selling Haaland to Salah because Salah just feels like really great value. I think Saka is up against Salah as well. So like, it's all well and good saying, well, Salah is probably worth it over Haaland because you save money. You also save that money with Saka over Salah. And I do think come the end of the season, they'll be very close in points totals. So if you've got a spare slot for Saka, or you've got the option to downgrade someone else to upgrade to a Salah instead, I'm not convinced it's actually worth it depending on what sacrifice you're making. Now, don't get me wrong. I think for the next 3 fixtures where Liverpool have got Brighton at home, Villa at home, Southampton away, Salah is better than Saka in isolation. But when you take the money into account and the long-term fixtures, I think Saka can easily keep up with him. So he's just brilliant. I hate the fact that I sold him. I think at the time it was a decent decision. It's annoying that Son obviously got injured for game week 9, but I want him back eventually. I don't necessarily want him back ahead of Cole Palmer. I think Palmer from 12 looks almost essential for me at least. But if I can get Saka as well, that's something I want to do. And if you want to bring him in now, I completely get it. So Konaté continues to be pretty popular this week. Over 70,000 transfers in ahead of Brighton at home in game week 10. And when you look at the Liverpool defender points total so far, he's looking good. 39 points is 8 more than Robertson, who's more expensive. And it's only 5 behind Trent and 6 behind Van Dijk. That 5.3 million price point is starting to look like extremely good value. And I keep asking myself, at what point will I be 100% confident that he's absolutely nailed on and going to stay injury-free? And the reality is I'll probably never be 100% sure. I'll be sat here in game weeks 25, 26, 27, whenever it might be, still a little bit cautious on Konaté. But in all seriousness, he's surely absolutely nailed at this point. It doesn't look like that partnership between him and Van Dijk is going to be broken up. And the only thing that's going to make him miss a game is injury. And so if he can stay injury-free, 5.3 million is an absolute bargain, to the point where I'm not even sure whether I'd want to pay the extra 0.8 for Van Dijk instead. I think with Van Dijk, you get absolute security, right? No one expects him to be benched whatsoever. And no matter how confident you are with Konaté, you're never going to be as confident as you are with Van Dijk, right? That probably makes sense. So I think Garnacho is pretty nailed on for Man United at the moment. Maybe a little bit less so with a new manager, but I'm not as confident as I am with Bruno Fernandes. That's kind of how I feel about Konaté and Van Dijk. And Van Dijk probably does have a bit more goal threat. Like Konaté has already scored this season, I know, but that's his only goal over the last 4 seasons in the Premier League. I don't know. I just think he's great. And the other thing that I really like about him and Liverpool defenders in general is how good their defence has been. Like you look at the defensive numbers, even against Arsenal away, 1.03 expected goals conceded. That is excellent against such a good attack. Against Chelsea at home, it was 0.99. Palace away in 7, 0.64. Wolves away in 6, 0.63. These are just really, really great defensive numbers. And I put it down early on to, well, they've just had a good fixture run, but it's continuing. And this looks to be the new norm. Now, when I look at the fixture run they've got coming up, it doesn't scream clean sheets. I think Brighton are a good attacking team, so are Villa. Southampton away in 12 is great. City at home is tough in 13. Then you've got Newcastle away and Everton away, right? It's not ideal, but at the same time, I think back to last year, if Arsenal had those fixtures, I'd be more than happy to double up because their defence was so good and there was some attacking potential in there as well, and they were a good price. So I've got Trent, and if I have to move Gabriel on, I'm very tempted just to get a second Liverpool defender because I think people know that the Liverpool defence is looking good this year. I'm not quite sure they're at the point of doubling up, and I almost want to try and get ahead of the curve, and 5.3 million for Konaté just feels great value. So if you're looking to bring him in this week, I really like it. I think there's plenty of clean sheets on the horizon for Liverpool, potentially even with the fixtures they've got coming up, and that price point is so good. Like, €8 is great, don't get me wrong, I love him. I think if you want to bring him in, you absolutely should. But if we're talking clean sheets, I'd still back Liverpool over the next 6. And so that 5.3 million price point over 4.6 million €8 might be worth paying for. And there's not that many defenders around 4.5 you can be massively confident every week are going to get you a clean sheet anyway. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to join the Konaté bandwagon. I may well just pay the extra for Van Dijk because I'm just that cautious. But unless he gets injured, I just don't see him missing the game anytime soon. So Dwight McNeil is currently yellow flagged ahead of Southampton away in game week 10, which is not ideal with such a good fixture right in front of him. He had to come off with an injury in game week 9. Now, Sean Dyche did say he hopes it's not too serious, but at the moment we don't know the extent of that injury. We do know that when he's fit and available, he starts every single game and often plays the full 90. So I wouldn't panic about selling him, because if he is fine, Sean Dyche will probably tell us. And Southampton away is so good, you might as well keep hold of him. And after that, the fixtures do get a little bit worse for Everton. But West Ham away, Brentford at home, Man United away, Wolves at home is not that bad. They get really bad from 15 onwards, but I don't think you need to panic about it right now. So if you're a McNeil owner, I know 66,000 of you have already sold him. I would probably be looking to hold on to him. If he ends up being out and you just want to get rid, I think it's actually not that obvious where to go to, but a lot of it will come down to how much money you've got to spend. So McNeil is 5.8 million. If you don't want to go up in value, then really you're down to the same players we've all been looking at over the last few weeks, probably Semenyo, Rodgers, Smith Rowe, and players like that. I think long term, Semenyo is going to be a really decent option, like from 11 onwards. The fixtures are pretty good. He often plays 90 minutes. His goal threat is decent. I really like him, but can you really bring him in before Man City? It's not ideal, right? In that situation, I'd maybe even think about benching McNeil and just playing someone else in your squad. But as a long-term pick, I don't mind moving to him if McNeil is definitely out. I think Smith Rowe at Fulham, a few people had started to get frustrated with him, but now he's got an assist, probably a little bit less so. I really like the next 3 fixtures. Brentford at home, Palace away, Wolves at home. After that, again, it gets a bit tricky. You've got Spurs, Arsenal and Liverpool in 3 of the next 4 game weeks. But then you've got Southampton at home in 17. I think short term, Smith Rowe is fine. But long term, I do prefer Semenyo. And if you're not already on Morgan Rodgers, again, like Spurs away, Liverpool away is not ideal to bring him in. But long term, the fixtures are quite good for Aston Villa. So arguably, out of the 3, if we're not taking money into account, I actually prefer Semenyo out of him, Smith Rowe and Rodgers for the long term. But Rodgers at 5.4 million may allow you to spend money elsewhere. If you're looking to go up a little bit in price, I still quite like Brennan Johnson despite the fact that he's blanked 2 games in a row. The only thing is now, if you're not already on him, he is about to run into Man City away in 12. So I'd possibly, and this does feel a little bit knee-jerk because he's finally got an attacking return, this might not be the worst time to buy Eze at Crystal Palace. He's down to 6.7 million already. Wolves away, Fulham at home, Villa away, Newcastle home, Ipswich away. Next 5 fixtures are pretty good. I think there's a chance over the next 5 that Eze could outscore Brennan Johnson. And we know that if Mateta's not on the pitch, Eze's going to take any penalties that Palace get as well. It does get tricky between 15 to 17 because you've got City at home, Brighton away, Arsenal at home. But after that, again, the fixtures are still pretty good. And the thing I like about Eze, and I know he's not got many returns this year, 1 goal, 1 assist, but once he's in your team, you never have to really worry about him as long as he starts getting a few returns along the way. because he's always going to play when he's fit. And I just think we're going to get into December. There's going to be more games. There's going to be injuries and suspensions. It's quite nice having players like that. You've just got to be confident that he can turn around, the FPL point. Like, he can actually start getting some FPL points, because it hasn't happened so far. So I'd be a little bit tempted by him. I think Garnacho is also worth looking at. He's only 6.2, so he's not that much more expensive than like Semenyo and McNeil. And the next 4 fixtures, okay, Chelsea at home is not amazing, but Leicester at home, Ipswich away, Everton at home, really good. The only thing is, there's going to be a new manager. Now, at the time of recording, Ten Hag's been sacked. Ruud van Nistelrooy is going to be interim manager. We don't know who the next long-term manager will be. Amorim from Sporting is currently the talk of the town. Will he be in charge by Chelsea? I don't know. I think we'll probably get a bit of a new manager bounce from Man United. I wouldn't be surprised if they do play really well over the next 4, but I also think fixtures will play a big part in that. The problem is you don't know how they're going to line up. So I think under Ten Hag, Garnacho was basically nailed at this point. 5 90 minutes in a row. And I'd be pretty confident he will still be in the 11 moving forward. But I guess you're a little bit less sure. So there is a bit more doubt than there would have been this time last week when Ten Hag was still in charge. So with Ten Hag in charge, Man United have been bad, but at least Garnacho was going to play. Maybe that's not the case anymore, but I think he has to be in the 11. I think he's, outside of Fernandes, he's probably Man United's best attacker. I think he's got to play. So for 6.2 million with those fixtures between 11 and 13, again, I quite like him as a short-term punt. But who knows? McNeil might be fine. If he is, you just keep him for Southampton away. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with the Game Week preview, team selection on Thursday, final thoughts on Friday, and deadline stream on Saturday. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you again soon.